They branded her as a thief, until the cowboy found the real thief hiding in his own house. Montana Territory, late autumn of 1884. The wind cut through the plains like a blade, sharp and unrelenting. Frost clung to the edges of the Claymore Ranch's tall iron gate, and the once rich soil was now brittle with cold. A whistle of icy air curled through the sprawling estate, where power ruled harder than weather. Then a shout rang out from the main house. "Everyone to the yard, now!" The command cracked like thunder. Tools hit the dirt. Men straightened from fence posts. Women emerged from kitchens, wiping flour on aprons. One by one, they moved toward the center of the yard, where a scene was already unfolding. Two large ranch hands were dragging a young woman forward by the arms. Emma Sloan, no more than 20, her cheeks raw from stove heat and now wind, stumbled with every step, still wearing her kitchen apron. In her trembling hands, she held an empty jewelry box. From the porch, Maureen Claymore pointed a gloved finger at her like a loaded pistol. "My sapphire chain is gone," the older woman barked, her silver hair braided tightly behind her sharp cheekbones. "It was in that box last night. This morning, it is not." Emma looked around at the dozens of faces staring at her. She shook her head. "I was cleaning," she said, her voice catching in her throat. "The box was open when I dusted the shelf. I never touched the necklace." "Liar," Maureen spat. "You're nothing but gutter-born trash. This is what happens when you feed rats. Eventually, they bite." Whispers moved like snakes through the crowd, but no one stepped forward. Not one voice rose to defend her. Across the yard, near the stables, Jack Callahan tightened the last strap on a saddle. The cowboy didn't move, he simply watched. The ranch hands forced Emma's arms wide. One ripped open her apron. Another tore at the seams of her dress pockets. She flinched as fingers grabbed, searched, and yanked, treating her like livestock. "Nothing," one of the men muttered, tossing her torn pocket to the ground. Emma's voice broke. "Please. I didn't take it. I swear before God." Maureen narrowed her eyes. "Then let him be your witness while I make an example of you." She snapped her fingers toward the forge. "Brand her." A gasp rippled through the workers. The blacksmith hesitated, but only for a second. Orders were orders. "Heat the iron," she ordered. The letters, "thief," right on her thieving hand. "No," Emma screamed, as two men gripped her shoulders and forced her onto a wooden workbench in the middle of the yard. She thrashed, kicking, crying, clawing at dirt. "Please, someone, please, don't let them." Her voice was swallowed by the hiss of iron meeting flame. Jack didn't move. Not yet. His jaw tightened. His hand twitched near the revolver holstered at his hip, but he didn't draw. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because no one else was moving either. Emma's eyes scanned the crowd one last time, and locked with Jack's. For a heartbeat, time stopped. He didn't look away. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. But he didn't look at her like the others did. He looked at her like she was human. The brand came down. The sizzling scream that followed was enough to stop even the wind. Emma's body arched in agony. The men released her. She collapsed to the frozen dirt, clutching her burned hand, her cries now gone. Only gasps remained. Maureen turned away. "Throw her off my land." They dragged Emma by the arms and tossed her just beyond the ranch gate. Her dress was torn. Her hand, blistered and scorched, clutched against her chest. She did not cry. She only looked back once. Jack was still there, standing in the same place, hat low over his brow. He reached up, touched the brim with 2 fingers, then let his hand fall. It was the smallest gesture. But for Emma, it was the first time someone had seen her without looking down. And with that, she turned and walked into the frost-covered woods, marked, humiliated, but unbroken. Outskirts of Claymore Ranch, early winter, 1884. The forest behind the Claymore property was quiet, blanketed by a thin layer of frost. Hidden among the bare trees stood an abandoned cabin, crooked and half swallowed by vines. No smoke came from its chimney, no sound came from within. Emma Sloane lay curled in a corner of the dusty floorboards, a threadbare blanket over her shoulders. Her right hand, red and blistered, pulsed with every heartbeat. The skin around the branded word thief was cracked, swollen. She hadn't cried in days. She hadn't spoken to anyone since the yard. A tin cup sat beside her, filled with cold stream water. She drank it in sips, letting it soothe her parched throat. There was no food inside, but each morning, when the sun barely kissed the treetops, a piece of dry bread, a strip of cloth, and a small tin of salve appeared just outside the door. No knock, no voice, just kindness without a face. On the fourth morning, she crawled to the edge of the broken window and watched. A figure moved toward the cabin, tall, broad-shouldered, coat pulled tight, hat low. He placed the bundle gently at the step, then turned without hesitation and walked back through the trees. Emma's breath caught. Jack Callahan. She didn't call out. She didn't open the door. She only leaned her forehead against the wood and shut her eyes. Someone believed her. Days passed. Her hand began to scab. Pain faded into a dull throb. The salve helped. She cleaned the wound each evening, even as her fingers trembled. She spoke aloud sometimes, only to the trees. "I didn't do it. I swear I didn't," she whispered, as though saying it again might make someone else believe it too. One night, beneath a full moon, she sat outside with her back to the cabin wall. Her wrapped hand rested in her lap. The moonlight cast a silver glow over the letters still etched into her flesh. She held a carving knife in her left hand, the blade glinting. She pressed the edge near the brand. One slice, maybe two, deep enough to erase it, deep enough to end it all. But her hand froze. A memory surfaced, not of pain, but of Jack's eyes as he watched from the yard. There had been no pity, no disgust, just presence. That was enough. She dropped the knife. Back at the ranch, Jack leaned against a post near the stables. He rolled a bit of hay between his fingers, watching the windows of the main house. Something gnawed at him. Emma had no reason to steal. She never left the ranch, never wore fine things. And that jewelry box, had it really been open when she cleaned? Jack remembered the hallway that night, the sound of footsteps that weren't hers, the click of a door. Silas, Maureen Claymore's youngest son, sullen and slick-haired, had keys to every room, and a temper. Jack had seen him sneak out after dark, heard the whispers about cards and debt. It all began to twist together in Jack's mind like an old lasso tightening. He spit the hay from his mouth and stood. Emma was hiding like a criminal, while the real one walked free, and maybe no one else gave a damn. But he did. Jack wiped his boots before stepping into the main house, not out of habit but because Maureen Claymore insisted on it. The woman ruled her ranch with an iron tongue and sharp eyes, and today those eyes followed Jack closely. "I want a complete inventory," she ordered, arms folded tightly over her chest. "Every piece, every coin, every trinket. The town is watching, and they won't call me a fool." Jack nodded without a word, adjusted his ledger, and moved through the halls. The house reeked of lavender polish and old lies. Portraits of Claymore's past glared from gold frames, as if daring anyone to question their bloodline. He began in the study, meticulously recording each clock, each glass case. Then the parlor, with its dusty heirlooms and velvet curtains. But it was when he reached the family wing that he slowed down. Silas Claymore's door was cracked open. Jack stepped in. The room stank of whiskey and stale sweat. A bottle lay tipped over on the nightstand, soaking into a stack of playing cards. The sheets on the bed were tangled. Dirt smudges tracked across the rug. Jack frowned. Outside, the ground had been dry for 3 days. He moved closer. A suitcase sat beneath the desk, half concealed by an old saddlebag. Jack crouched, lifted the lid, and stopped. Inside was a small wooden jewelry box, identical to the one Emma had been accused of emptying. Except this one wasn't empty. It was a decoy. A clever one, but not clever enough to fool a man who had seen the real box, scorched by firelight as Emma was branded. He didn't touch it. Jack stood and backed away as Silas entered the room. "What are you doing in here?" Silas asked, slurring slightly. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his shirt half-buttoned. "Inventory," Jack replied calmly. "Just checking the rooms." Silas scoffed, rubbing his jaw. "You think I stole that necklace too?" Jack's tone didn't change. "I didn't say that." "Well, maybe you should. I mean, if I knew where it was." He leaned in, breath heavy with gin. "That girl wouldn't be walking around. She'd be buried." Jack held his gaze. Silas chuckled darkly, then pushed past him toward the bed. Jack didn't move. He didn't say a word. But in his mind, the pieces were locking into place. Emma had no reason to steal, no access to the locked drawer. She had no buyers, no escape route. But Silas? He had everything: motive, opportunity, a habit of debt, and a mother who would blame the world before blaming her son. Jack made a final mark in his ledger, then walked out. By the time the sun began to set, he stood beside the stables, the orange sky casting long shadows across the dirt. Horses stirred in their stalls, restless as the wind changed. Jack tossed the saddle he had been holding onto the ground with a sharp thud. He leaned against the fence post, staring at nothing. Emma wasn't just some girl wronged by power. She wasn't a thief, or a problem to be solved. She had been sacrificed to protect a secret. And now, Jack was done watching. Emma stood at the edge of the paddock, the sky still bruised with the last shades of night. Her fingers trembled as she placed the bundle by the gate: worn gloves, a scrap of cloth folded around a tin of salve, and the threadbare scarf Jack had once left for her without a word. She didn't linger. Her boots barely made a sound in the frostbitten dirt as she turned to leave, shoulders squared, though her heart dragged behind like a broken wheel. "Leaving without a goodbye?" Jack's voice came low, and even behind her. Emma froze. She hadn't heard his steps. Slowly, she turned to face him, eyes already bracing for judgment, but there was none in his face. Only calm, only that maddening quiet calm. "I don't owe you anything," she said, lifting her chin. "I'm not here to say thank you. I'm done playing the grateful beggar." Jack took a step forward, his eyes scanning her face like reading a map of all the places pain had left its mark. "You didn't steal that necklace," he said simply. Emma's jaw clenched. "And who'd believe that now?" "I would." She laughed, bitter and broken. "You're the only one, then. But belief doesn't erase scars." "It might help stop new ones," he replied. Emma shook her head, tears threatening. "You don't get it. I've lived my whole life with people putting names on me that aren't mine. Thief, liar, waste, it sticks, like tar. You think one word from a cowboy's gonna scrub it clean?" Jack didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just looked at her, steady and still. "It's not pity," he said finally. "It's justice." Silence hung between them, sharp and delicate like frost on glass. "I've been watching," Jack continued. "Silas, he's the only one with a key to the East Corridor, and the only one who's gotten real jumpy since all this started." Emma blinked, surprised. "Silas? He's got debt, gambling, might have pawned it himself." Emma lowered her eyes. "Even if that's true, no one's gonna believe me. You saw what they did." "I saw, and I think it's time we gave them something else to see." She looked up at him now, and for the first time since that horrible day, her eyes weren't clouded with fear. They were searching. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, if you want to carry this forever, walk away. No one will stop you. But if you want to clear your name, I've got a plan, and I need you in it." She hesitated. The cabin had been safe, in a cold and hollow sort of way, but safe hadn't healed her. It hadn't made her whole. She looked down at her hand, at the branded scar, still raw around the edges. still claiming her. She exhaled slowly. If I do this, I'm not doing it for redemption. Jack nodded. Good, do it for truth. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. All right, I'm in. He extended a hand, not as a promise, not as a protector, just as a man standing beside her. She took it. It wasn't romantic. There were no swelling violins, no declarations of trust. It was quiet and deliberate, a pact between two people tired of silence. Behind them, the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting long shadows over the pasture. For the first time in weeks, Emma didn't feel like she had to hide hers, not from him. They walked toward the barn together, not yet victorious, but no longer alone. And in that still, frost-tipped morning, something unspoken stirred, something like hope, something like fire, something that couldn't be branded away. The Claymore house sat silent under the moonlight, its windows glowing dimly like tired eyes. Inside, the halls creaked with the chill of winter, the walls steeped in wealth and rot. Jack moved through the shadows like he belonged there. In a way, he did. Years of silence had earned him trust. Now, silence was his disguise. Outside the back entrance, Emma waited, bundled in a plain shawl and holding a covered tin. Her apron bore the name of a town bakery, a disguise Jack had arranged with a friend in Buckhorn. Her heart thudded so hard she thought it might echo through the stone. He slipped her the key with a whisper. East wing, third door on the left, I'll keep the kitchen busy. She nodded once, and then disappeared into the hall like smoke. Emma crept down the corridor, avoiding creaking floorboards. Her fingers shook as she fit the key into Silas's door. It turned with a soft click. She slipped inside, closing the door with barely a sound. The room was dark, but moonlight streamed in through the slats of the shutter. She moved quickly. The desk, the dresser, nothing. Then, under the floor rug, she felt it, an uneven board. She pried it loose, revealing a shallow compartment. Inside, a velvet pouch torn at the corner, and beside it, a folded receipt. She opened the pouch with trembling hands. Half of the missing sapphire necklace glinted in the dark, the chain snapped. The pawn ticket was dated 2 days before she was accused. Emma's breath caught. Her eyes burned, not from fear, but from the sudden, overwhelming confirmation that she hadn't imagined it. She had been framed. Then, the door slammed open. Silas's silhouette filled the doorway, drunk and snarling. What the hell? He lunged, yanking her by the wrist and dragging her out into the hall. Thief! He roared, louder this time. The little rat came back to steal the rest. Down the hall, doors opened, lights flared. The family and servants began to gather in confusion and alarm. Emma struggled, but Silas shoved her into the grand foyer. He ripped the velvet pouch from her hand, holding it up like a trophy. Caught her red-handed, he shouted. She broke in to steal again. Jack burst through the kitchen door, eyes darting between Emma and Silas. Without hesitation, he strode forward and slammed into Silas with his shoulder, sending the man crashing into a side table. Silverware clattered to the floor. Maureen Claymore appeared at the top of the stairs, robes flowing, fury etched into every wrinkle of her face. What in God's name is going on? Silas scrambled up. She was in my room, with the necklace. Jack stood in front of Emma, shielding her. That necklace was already broken and hidden. Ask him where the pawn slip is. She broke in, Silas spat. With him. They're both liars. Maureen narrowed her eyes. Both of you. In the storage shed. Now. Emma and Jack were marched out at gunpoint by one of the guards, locked into the old storage barn near the horse pens. Inside, the air was bitter cold, and the walls smelled of dust and mold. Emma sat down hard on an overturned crate, her face a mask of fury. I told you not to drag me back into this, she snapped. Look where that got us. Jack knelt beside her, voice calm. We got what we needed. The truth's in that pawn ticket. He couldn't destroy it in time. She hugged her arms around herself, silent for a long while. Then, through clenched teeth, "You better be right." He didn't answer, just sat beside her, his back to the wall, eyes trained on the door as if he could will dawn to come faster. Emma looked down at her palm. The broken chain glinted in the dim moonlight, leaking through the boards. She curled her fingers around it, eyes stinging again. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, two people waited, for morning, for justice, for a name to be cleared. The morning sun rose cold and pale over Buckhorn's town square, where rows of wooden stalls were already bustling with townsfolk. The market fair was in full swing, peddlers shouting prices, children chasing each other with sticks, and the scent of baked bread filling the air. Emma and Jack stood at the edge of the square. Both had been released from the Claymore estate just hours earlier. Maureen Claymore had hurled her warning like poison. "I want you both off this land by sundown. If I see your shadows again, I'll have the sheriff drag your hides through the dust." Jack had said nothing in return, but in his coat pocket was the broken sapphire chain and the pawn ticket, proof enough, if someone dared to act on it. "Come with me," he said to Emma, who still clutched her injured hand. "It's not over yet." They crossed the town square together, boots crunching against frost-covered dirt. Jack handed the evidence to Sheriff Talbot just outside the general store. The sheriff, an aging man with a belly of hesitation, squinted at the documents. "Jack, you know I can't cross the Claymores over something this thin. That family's got roots deep here." Emma stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "If you won't speak the truth, then I will." She didn't wait for permission. She turned and climbed the wooden steps of the public speaking platform, usually reserved for church readings or town auctions. Her boots echoed on the planks. People turned, curious at first, then stunned into silence as they saw her. Emma stood tall. She wore a plain coat, her hair tied back. Her hand, still marked by the brand, was bare in the cold. Maureen Claymore stood across the square, giving a sermon-like lecture about propriety and loyalty to a group of churchwomen. Her voice stopped mid-sentence when she saw Emma. "You all know me," Emma said. "Or at least, you think you do." "A thief," they said. "That's what they burned into my skin." She held up her hand. "But I never touched that necklace. And I wasn't the only one who had access to the room." People murmured. Some looked away. Others stared, riveted. "Here," she said, pulling the broken chain from her pocket. "This is what I found, in Silas Claymore's room, along with this." She handed the pawn ticket to Sheriff Talbot, who had walked up beside her, unable now to ignore the crowd's attention. A stir moved through the people like a gust of wind. Silas Claymore pushed through the gathering, his face red, lips curled in disgust. "She's lying. She stole it, then planted it back." Jack stepped forward, calm but unflinching. "She didn't plant anything, Silas. I found the key. I watched you sneak out the night it vanished." "You have no proof," Silas spat. "This ticket is your name," Jack said, holding the slip toward the sheriff. "And I'd wager the pawnbroker remembers your face." Sheriff Talbot hesitated no longer. "Silas Claymore," he said, voice rising, "you're under arrest for theft and false accusation." The crowd gasped. Maureen screamed, pushing forward. "No, this is a mistake. My son wouldn't." But the sheriff raised a hand. "Enough, Maureen. The law speaks now." Two deputies took Silas by the arms. He thrashed but couldn't escape. Emma stepped down from the platform. Her face was pale, her breath visible in the morning chill. No one applauded. No one spoke. Maureen Claymore turned her back without a word. The churchwomen scattered like leaves. Jack walked up beside Emma and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "They won't say sorry," he said, "but you know, and that's enough." Emma looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes did not carry fear, but relief. They stood together in silence as the market square slowly returned to life. The late afternoon wind stirred the dry grass along the western hills outside Buckhorn. Faint trails carved by hooves wove between cedar trees and rock. Emma stood at the edge of the clearing with a single suitcase at her feet and a rolled bundle of belongings wrapped in cloth. The air was sharp and clear. She looked toward the mountains, planning to leave and never look back, start anew where no one knew her name or her scar. Her fingers brushed the lid of the wooden case she had packed. Inside were a few dresses, a worn book, and a pair of boots with cracked soles. As she tied the knot around the bundle, she heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. Jack Callahan stood a few paces away, quiet as always. In his hand, he held something wrapped in canvas. "I brought this," he said, holding it out. Emma didn't take it. Her eyes searched his, waiting for explanation. He unwrapped the canvas. It was a paintbrush. A large one, stiff-bristled, new but simple. "You said once, when you were a girl, you liked to paint," Jack said. "I figured you might want to start again. Paint everything you lost. Or maybe everything you never got to see clearly." She stared at the brush, then looked away. "You think giving me that makes up for what they did?" she said, her voice thin but sharp. "No," Jack said, "but maybe it helps you take it back." He stepped closer. "I used to wear a blue coat, cavalry. I swore loyalty to a flag I believed in, and then I got left behind, labeled a traitor. I spent years trying to prove I wasn't what they said." Emma's breath caught. She watched him. "I know what it's like," he continued, "to lose your name, to be defined by something that ain't true." Silence held between them. Slowly, Emma raised her hand, the one marked by the scarred word, thief. This time, she didn't hide it. "This mark was made to break me," she said, voice trembling. "But if I hadn't stood up that day at the market, I'd still be letting it." Jack nodded, his voice steady. "You didn't let it. You stood in front of them all. You claimed yourself." She let out a shaky breath, the wind stirring her coat. "I am not what they called me," she said. Not to Jack, but to the sky, to the mountains, to herself. Jack reached out and gently rested his hand on her shoulder. "No, you're not," he said. "And if you're heading out to start again, I'd ride beside you, wherever that road goes." Emma didn't answer with words. Instead, she stepped toward him, the brush still in her hand. For the first time, she didn't flinch from being seen. Their hands met, scarred fingers wrapping around his calloused ones. Not because of fear, not from desperation, but because this time they chose to. They turned toward the path down the hill, side by side. Behind them, the wind whispered through the grass. Before them, a quiet road stretched toward something new. Jack glanced sideways and murmured, "Let's go home." Emma nodded. "Let's." They walked on, no longer alone. Spring had come early that year. The snow that once crowned the distant peaks was melting into rivers that ran through fields painted in the green of rebirth. 40 miles from Buckhorn, in a quiet valley tucked between whispering pines and open prairie, Emma and Jack began their new life. They bought a run-down stable with rotting beams and a leaning roof, and rebuilt it board by board. Jack's hands, once hardened by saddles and silence, now worked with purpose, building walls, raising fences, framing the tiny cabin that would be their home. Emma painted while the wood dried. Her fingers, still bearing the faint scar of injustice, danced with colors across canvas, fields of golden wheat, children chasing horses, and skies wide with freedom. In a corner of town, she opened a modest gallery. It smelled of pine, old books, and fresh oil paint. Locals came in to admire the art. They didn't know her past. They only knew she smiled when she talked about the hills. No one whispered, "Thief." No one asked about the scar. One afternoon, while the light slanted warm through the window, Emma sat before a blank canvas. Slowly, with deliberate strokes, she painted her hand, scar and all. But in the painting, It held a brush. No longer hidden, no longer ashamed. Jack stood behind her, arms folded. He didn't say anything at first. Then, softly, "That's not a thief's hand anymore. You gave it a new name." That night, over supper and soft laughter, Jack placed a small wooden box in front of her. It was simple, carved from cedar. It reminded Emma of the one from the Claymore estate, the one that had nearly destroyed her. Her hand hesitated. Then she opened it. Inside was no ring, just a folded scrap of paper, with 3 words in Jack's careful handwriting. Emma Sloane Callahan. She stared at it, blinking through tears. "Yes," she whispered, 100 times yes. Their wedding had no preacher, no altar. Just the wind, the mountain shadows, and a promise spoken under the wide Montana sky. "I won't promise to protect you from the world," Jack said, his voice low, "but I'll never let you face it alone again." One morning, weeks later, a letter arrived. It was from an old cook who'd once worked for the Claymores. The handwriting was shaky. "Silas has been convicted. Maureen Claymore's reputation is in ruins. The town knows the truth now. I'm sorry I stayed quiet. I hope you find peace." Emma folded the letter gently and placed it beside her easel. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. "That past belongs to me," she said aloud, "but it doesn't name me anymore." The wind shifted. From the porch, the sounds of tiny feet came rushing. "Mama!" a child's voice rang out. A little girl with brown curls tumbled through the doorway. Emma scooped her up into her arms, holding her tight. "You see this scar?" she asked, pointing gently at her hand. "They tried to brand me with it to make me fall, but, because of it, I found your father." That evening, they all sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The cabin glowed in amber light. Jack's arm rested around Emma's shoulders. The girl nestled between them, drawing doodles on the wood with a stick. No one called her a thief anymore. She had chosen her own name, and it was home. If you enjoyed Emma and Jack's unforgettable journey from injustice to redemption, from a cold Montana winter to the warmth of a hand-built home, don't forget to show your love. Hit that hype button to keep stories like this alive, and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of grit, heart, and healing under the wide frontier sky. We've got more legends to tell, and your support keeps the fire burning. See you on the next ride, partner.